energy commodities market. Led by two industry veterans, Bill Shanahan and Brian Pieri, as they host their weekly commodity market recap. With over 55 years of combined experience in the energy sector, Bill and Brian bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table. From trading and hedging to finance and optimization, they have seen it all and are here to break down the latest market trends and share their insights. So sit back, relax, and get ready to dive into the world of energy commodities with Bill and Brian on EnergyRogue.com. The latest insights and analysis on the energy commodities market.
How's it going?
On the
Welcome.
energy commodities market.
Hey, everybody.
Led by two industry veterans.
What's going on,
I
brother?
was trying to do the music. That didn't work. Whatever that was, it didn't work.
Hey.
So, listen, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for showing up. We're going to talk a little bit about the OPEC cuts and the outlook. We had some big news over the weekend with OPEC Plus submitting kind of their plan for the remainder of 2024 and 2025. And we are going to outline that for you. But do us a favor, drop us a comment, let us know where you are, what you're interested in, and if you have questions along the way, because we're gonna be diving into this. This is a working session, and listen, we're just gonna try and lay out all the facts as we know them, and then try and organize for the future.
We're not athletes. We're baseball players.
Batting practice.
Finally.
So we are going to cover all of that. So, Bill, any thoughts before we get rolling? I think Bill's on mute. You're still on mute.
I'm getting you double in my headset.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I don't know what the deal is.
Okay. Well, listen, you can go ahead and go on mute. I'm going to step through the OPEC Plus cuts. If we're having any sound issues, drop us a comment, let us know. But we're going to talk about OPEC cuts and the outlook. So the current production for April is the latest that we have reports from EIA and OPEC. So if we look at the OPEC countries only, they were producing about 26.5 million barrels a day. OPEC Plus countries were over 14.4 million barrels a day, totaling over 41 million barrels a day. So if you look at that, OPEC Plus, a big contributor there is Russia, because Russia contributes, let me change this. And Russia contributes about 9. So that is going to be good. Apologies for the handwriting there. But we are, after looking at April production, May's production is going to be coming out in the next probably 10 days. So 10 days, there's going to be added reports from EIA and added reports from OPEC because they submit a monthly report. So the OPEC countries, 26.5 million. OPEC plus countries, 14.4, for a total of 41 million. So hang on to that number. Now, let's take a look at OPEC Plus, and they've had two components of cuts. 3.66, which were announced between 2022 and 2023, and an additional 2.2 million barrels a day announced after that. That does include voluntary cuts, and these voluntary cuts, Saudi Arabia is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Russia, theoretically on paper, has a pretty big cut in place. However, we're going to dive into the productive capacity of that. So the production cut versus goal, and let's see if Bill's back online. Bill, are you back online?
I think I'm back online, but I'm still getting you double in my headset. I have no idea why.
Okay. Okay. Well, why don't we do this? I'll just ask you to explain production cut versus goal. What does that mean?
So when you talk about a production cut versus a goal, they have goals that are set by OPEC. And what this means is that it doesn't necessarily mean their goals are based on their theoretical capacity, but that doesn't really have to do with what their production is. So what you need to do at that point is sort of begin to look at the difference of what they can actually produce versus what their goal is. And cutting their goal means nothing if their production is not equal to their goal or over to their goal.
Yep. And this is critical. This is critical because when we look at production cuts versus goal, well, I'll get back to ourselves. When we look at production cuts versus goal, I'm going to show you our complicated spreadsheet that we're keeping track of the previous cuts pledged, what the current production is, the implied capacity, max production, reasonable max. If you want to have access to this spreadsheet as well as so much more, you can join us at energyrogue.com. I'm going to spend about a minute on a commercial. We have two main products, Rogue Edge, which is $89 a month, and Rogue Premium, which is $179 a month. And Rogue Edge, you have access to 150 interactive charts on natural gas, crude oil, refined products, NGLs, electricity, and this is on supply, demand, imports, exports, storage, stocks, and so much more. For example, let me show you on the supply side of the equation. We take a look at, we've got rig counts in there, oil production by basin, so you can actually dive in there. But let's scroll down to OPEC. You know, one thing that we've heard people talk about is, well, how much extra production is Iran going to provide? Well, let's take a look at what Iran has produced in the past. And this is the power of Rogue Edge, which is only $89 a month. You can see that in 2018, before a lot of sanctions and political pressure came upon Iran, they were at 3.8 million barrels a day. They have climbed back up to 3.2. So there's a lot of people that believe that Iran has a lot of spare capacity. We look at history on what they've produced in the past, and I would argue that they don't have a lot of productive capacity. But that is just one example of one chart for the 150 interactive charts. So if you are looking at supply, demand, imports, exports, storage stocks, you can sign up for Rogue Edge and then have access to this so that you can interact with the chart and then even download it if you want. So in addition to that, you get daily emails, weekly videos, weekly reports, and we would love to have you. We are now on 5 continents and 32 out of 50 states in the United States. And if you want to go a step further on Rogue Premium, it has everything inside of Rogue Edge Plus. We develop a custom strategy for you with routine video calls and access to our Discord channel. So we cover everything in the market that are, this says hold on to cash, so maybe hold your cash. So that's one of the topics that we would cover in there. So Rogue Edge, $89 a month, Rogue Premium, $179. Let's keep going. So if we look at OPEC countries, only 26.5 million barrels a day. OPEC plus 14.4 million barrels a day, totaling 41 million barrels a day. And if we go back to this 5.86 estimated production cuts, that takes us to an implied capacity of 46.8 million barrels a day. Now, the reason this is important is our total demand in the world is about 101 million barrels a day, and there's expectations for growth IEA is projecting for 2024 a 1.4 million barrel a day increase. OPEC, it has been staying pretty consistent at 2.25, with a heavy part of the growth coming in the second half of the year. So if 5 million barrels came onto the market very quickly, prices would collapse. So now, one of the considerations when we look at this, we took a look at the targets, their production targets by country, and then who is overproducing and underproducing. I think Libya is 1050. So when we look at Venezuela, for example, they have their own implied target at 1.2 million barrels a day. They are currently at 809. So there's a lot to be left on the table. And right now you have Nigeria, which is 146,000 barrels a day behind. 146,000 barrels a day behind their target. Venezuela is 100,000 barrels. Mexico is 118,000. Now let's flip sides and look at the notable countries that are above the targets. Russia, 343,000 barrels a day over. Iraq, 172,000 barrels a day over. And Iran is only 52,000 barrels a day over. And then there's a smattering of a bunch of other countries that are above or below their targets. So we went back in time and we took a look at each one of these countries. And let's just take Saudi Arabia, for example. And we are going to look back in time and say from 2016 to today, what is let me scroll this down. Outside of the outlier months of this 11.6 and 11 million barrels a day, I would say, let me draw a line here. And right here, I would say that their probably max is somewhere just above 10 million barrels a day. So there's going to be periods that are above there, but those periods are shorter in duration. So I think their max is going to be about 10.5 million barrels a day. And they currently are at 9 million barrels a day. And the implied cut, or the announced cut, is 2 million barrels a day. So that implies 11. I think that's about 500,000 barrels a day inflated. And the reasonable max is about 10.6 million barrels a day. So the estimated reasonable production that could be brought online, Saudi Arabia, these are my numbers. We're not financial advisors. None of this is trading advice. Please, please read all the disclaimers below and then take a nice nap after that. Saudi Arabia could add 1.5 million barrels a day. Iran, another 380. Kuwait, 360. Iraq, 300. UAE, about 270, totaling 2.9 million barrels a day, which is drastically different than this 5.86. So that is a key consideration, is 2.9 million barrels a day. If OPEC is right, or OPEC plus is right, and we have 2.2 million barrels a day of growth, they can bring all this production online. So now it gets into another nuance. The cuts versus reasonable. OPEC has two components of cuts, or two timed differences of cuts. 3.66 announced between 2022 and 2023, 2.2 that were announced after that, totaling 5.86, and the reasonable implied capacity based upon our numbers and our analysis is about 2.9 million barrels a day. Now,
So realize that those goals come from self-reported capacity. There's no one out there verifying what their capacity is. A good example is the UAE. Right now, their capacity is showing that They are at 2.9. But what has happened is that they've increased their production or increased their possibility that their capacity could go up to 5 million barrels a day, but they're still being allocated on OPEC based on the 2.9. So that's why they just got a reprieve in this last meeting to be able to add about another 300,000 barrels a day to their capacity. So, or to their quota. So it's important to know that I know nobody, when they talk about oil production, ever lies. So
Just a bit outside. He tried the corner and missed.
that's exactly what happens. And so, and folks, I apologize for going off. There's the only thing, Brian and I talk every day, and I hear Brian in my ears. But today I was hearing two Brians in my ears, and that's just too.
Whoa! Wait a minute.
So now that I'm back on, a lot of what we were talking about and that Brian was talking about is the fact that when you start looking at this stuff, you have to have some sort of, I used to call it a chuckle test. In other words, you look at the numbers, you go, oh yeah, that's not right. And there are some, let's say some people call it cheating. It's not really cheating when it's a voluntary cut, but there are some people who underreport or overreport. And so you have to look at the biggest players. And I think, Brian, have you gone through that slide yet where you had the biggest players up there?
Let me see. I don't think this one. No,
Yeah.
that's how much productive capacity. However, let's just flip to the raw data. Let me blow this up just a little bit. So what this is we have the current production right here, which is about 26.5 million barrels a day for OPEC plus, and 14.4 for the plus
right.
I'm sorry, 26.5 for OPEC and 14.4 for the plus component, totaling 41 million barrels a day. If you add back into the capacity based upon individual countries and their contribution to the cuts, that comes up with about a 4 million barrel a day difference. And then what I also took a look at is what their max production over the last 5 years has been. Or actually, I think I went 7 years because I wanted to discount COVID. But then in looking at it, very similar to when we were looking at Saudi Arabia, and anybody listening, if you have thoughts, I've targeted about 10. Well, actually, you know what? It is a little bit higher than that. I actually targeted 10.6 million barrels a day. So right about here. And what I did is I was discounting these spikes, and these spikes right here are short-term dynamics. And when we look at the history dating back to 2017, that's about the max that I really see on a consistent basis. So you have to evaluate, well, how much is a reasonable max? This is going to be a subjective number. Everybody's going to come up with a different number. This is our number, which is showing about 229 million barrels a day, or about 3 million barrels a day. I think in this slide, I think I came up with 2.9. But I think there's roughly 3 million barrels a day of capacity that could be brought online quickly. And the rest is probably not necessarily what I consider a cut, but more an underperformance of their quota and their goal. And this gets back to what you were enlightening us on, is what is a production cut versus a goal, Bill?
So, if you don't ever produce it, it's hard to cut it. And so when they start talking about they're reducing their goals, well, if they never made it to their goal, well, it's easier to reduce because you're not really reducing anything. And so they got to be there. And so here's a good example, because Saudi Arabia talk about doing their voluntary cuts. Well, they report outside of OPEC, they report their capacity at 12 million barrels a day. And so, but inside OPEC, it's related at 11.5 or 11.8 or 11.2. I can't remember which one that was. I've seen a lot of numbers here lately. And so they cut based on that, not based on what they report as their capacity outside of OPEC. So what happens is you end up with a lot of numbers floating around. But what Brian and I try to do is we try to look at what we see as reported production. That's not as easy as it sounds. And
Right.
so it takes a little bit more research. And then from that, we try to see what they actually produced and can they actually produce that. Now, obviously, all companies, especially state companies, are trying to figure out a way to produce more. And they're always working on that. But they suffer the same things we do in the U.S. They have decline on their wells. They have all sorts of different things that are going on. And so that's where the global
Hey, Giorgio.
Hey, Giorgio. That's where all the not just it's infrastructure and the geopolitical issues start coming in, because the oil is not where the demand is. And so you have to figure out a way to get it there. And so that's why that stuff becomes really important. And so that's when foreign policy comes into part. And so, I mean, there's a lot of things that come in to affect these numbers, but we try to stick with the numbers, look what they're doing, just like here in Saudi Arabia. They may have 12 because it looks like they peaked there. What was that peak there, Brian? Their top peak production?
I think it was 11.6. Yeah, 11.6 million barrels a day.
Okay. That's the best they've ever done for a long time. And
now what's interesting, that is April of 2020. That is fascinating.
Oh, wow. Right.
That is because that was the height of the bearishness of COVID. Well, not quite the height, but pretty high.
Yeah. And so that's what we try to bring here is a practical look, as well as just evaluate the numbers and what they mean behind the scenes. That takes a lot of reading, and it's interesting. And there's some people you just can't get numbers on. I was trying to find some numbers on Libya today, and apparently they're a little bit more secretive about it than most. So,
yeah.
But what's important to know is top 4 producers in the world is the U.S. is number 1. I believe either Russia or Saudi Arabia are close behind each other. And then what really surprised me, Brian, when I looked at that number, was number 4 was Canada.
Yeah. I mean, Canada, as a matter of fact, we're going to cover that right now, because as we're looking at OPEC, we need to look at what reasonable, how much capacity is out there. We're estimating about 2.9 or 3 million barrels a day based upon our subjective viewpoint, not trading advice. But when you look at the non-OPEC view of production growth, OPEC, as well as many other countries, has stated that non-OPEC growth for 2024 is going to come from U.S., Canada, Guyana, and Brazil. So that's what is quoted out there. So what about non-OPEC? Well, the U.S., and this is another reason that would love to have you at Energy Rogue. It's only $89 a month, because you can take a quick look at our production, and let's see how much production we've grown since October of 2023. What do you see there? I don't see growth.
Man, that's a pancake. That's a pancake graph.
That is a pancake. So when we look at the United States, we're looking at 13.1 million barrels a day. It's the same since October. So we're virtually halfway through 2024. We haven't seen a bit of growth. And the reason why is one of our other charts that you could have access to, which is we track shale oil production decline, and we also track how much by basin, how much we are increasing or decreasing. And you can see since July of last year, we've almost been treading water. So we've added production, but we've really been treading water. So U.S., we've been the outlier saying we're not going to see much production growth because we haven't seen the rigs respond. Brazil is at 3.5 million barrels, 3.45. That's 200,000 barrels a day less than the fourth quarter of 2023. Canada is at 5.1 million barrels a day. It's 200,000 less than November, December. But an interesting thing is Canada starts the year low and then rises through the year. So we're already starting at a higher mark than last year. So I do expect year-on-year growth from Canada, maybe 300,000 or 400,000 barrels a day. Brazil, I would be bearish. U.S., I would also be bearish. Guyana, they've already increased 300,000 barrels, went from 300,000 to 660. The next spot,
So that's almost 100% increase.
it is, but we're not going to see more until 2025. And the reason why, let me blow this up a little bit, is where the development is happening. This is all on offshore blocks. These are
Right.
bigger projects. These are not short-term projects. These are projects that are going to play out over time. So we're not going to see too much more from Guyana this year. So when I look at non-OPEC, US, I don't expect growth. I actually expect decline. Brazil, I'd say plus or minus a couple 100,000 or 100,000, I'd say. Canada, I do see growth, and I would put the mark at 200,000. Guyana, zero growth from here. So I don't see that increasing anything. So now let's wrap up. We're going to wrap up, and then if you have any questions, hit us up because we do see these. I believe we see them. We do see these questions. But when we look at the conclusions of OPEC and OPEC Plus, the countries to watch, Saudi Arabia could bring on 1.5 million barrels a day quickly. UAE is slowly growing. As a matter of fact, Bill, weren't you saying that they had some big development that you were just telling me about that?
Yeah, it was the Anak is what it's called.
Anak.
And so it's got a chance to add probably another 2 million barrels a day by I think it's mid 2025.
Okay.
And so that's a significant increase for them.
Right.
They're going from about 2.9 to over 5 million barrels a day. So they're getting a 60% increase in their crude oil.
Well, you can look at this. The reasonable max, they're currently sitting at 2.9 million barrels a day per April production numbers. Their reasonable max is about 3.2. And with this development, I mean, that would take them up massively.
Right.
So that would
to have that much influence starting with that small of volume.
Yep.
I mean, I understand Saudi Arabia, they're starting with about 10.5 to 11 million barrels a day. They can go up 1.5 million. But for UAE to start at 3 million a day and go up by almost 2 million a day, that's a pretty significant growth. And so that'll be the one to watch. I think when it's all said and done, I think Russia's going to produce everything they possibly can. I think Iran's going to produce everything they possibly can, but probably have more potential to increase than Russia as far as what's in the ground. I think Iran's biggest problem is what they have to do to get it out and who their market is. Saudi Arabia is still the dial that sort of adjusts OPEC. And so when it's all said and done, they make the biggest impact. But they still have cash they need to do it. So I think when it's all said and done, Saudi Arabia is still the dial. But I think the UAE is sort of coming in there and trying to be a little bit more important player than they have been in the past as far as making those decisions. It's going to be really interesting. If you think our politics are complex, go to the Middle East. That'll make us look pretty simple.
So let's take a look by country. So we got Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran. Let's look at production history, and let's start with Saudi Arabia right here. Okay, and this is just a different chart with the same information. You can see 11 million barrels in November 2018, 11.6, and you can start to see why 10.6 million barrels a day really seems to feel like an implied max capacity. So if they're sitting at currently 9 million barrels a day, I see that as 1.5 million barrels of growth. Russia, they have built back arguably everything that they can, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. You can see they've started to come down, and they do have slow production growth.
I think that's because they're outrunning their infrastructure.
Right. UAE is when you start to see these cuts, these are because of the cuts. UAE is another one that could come online very quickly, but it's probably 200,000 to 400,000 barrels a day, which UAE is going to be unwound in the fourth quarter. Venezuela, a lot of people have expected Venezuela to add a bunch because before their challenges, they were in November 2016, 2 million barrels a day. They built back to 800. And I think that's going to be a slow moving
But now
growth.
their president challenges that they've announced that they want to be averaging 1.2 million barrels a day in 2024 and 2 million barrels a day in 2025. Now I don't know how much of that is hype and how much is that reality.
April is the last month reported, and per EIA they were 820,000, and per OPEC 809,000. So it's important to evaluate where your information sources come from. That's why we look at both. So, but
along with other news articles from Reuters and various other places. But I think Venezuela has potential. I just don't know that they have the political discipline to get it there, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Right.
And it's what we've always said, Brian. Reserves is not production.
Right.
And so just because you have the reserves doesn't mean that you're able to produce it in a way to get it out. But so I think Venezuela has
it. If I'm just spitballing here, this is what I see as the productive capacity, which is about 2.4, and that doesn't count the other OPEC countries.
Are you saying Iraq's not going to produce any pizza? What is that?
No, that's a zero.
Oh, okay.
It's a zero. I do the line. So
but I don't know if they're going to produce any more pizza, but it sure does look like we're not producing pizza out of Iraq.
And Brazil, I'm gonna be optimistic and say 0.1. Canada, I'm gonna say optimistic 0.2, and Guyana 0 from here. So I
don't disagree with you. I think Canada can get up to 500,000 barrels.
Okay, and maybe that's true. We'll have to ask our Rogue Edge members in our Discord channel, and see, because they are tracking some of the development in northern Canada. So these are the main conclusions, and really coming back down to how much this cut means really gets back to where we started. It's going to be an opinion of how much extra above this 41 does somebody believe?
Do you think you're presenting right now? Oh,
yes.
There we go.
So I did believe I was presenting. So how much of this 41 million barrels a day, how much extra productive capacity is there? And I would argue, and my number right now, you may ask me tomorrow, I may have a different one, is 2.9 million barrels a day. And that is going to hinge on the demand growth for the second half, which we're not going to cover in today's live stream, because if we want to talk about demand growth, that is getting very tricky So,
So
wrapping up.
with that, Brian. So what we're pointing toward is that with a total production of about 101, 102 million barrels a day, the biggest growth we see capacity is out of OPEC, and it's roughly just under 3 million barrels a day as the most that can be done. And we'll talk about demand later, but when we just look at supply, these are the numbers that we pull out. And so it doesn't look like anything outside of OPEC can give enough growth capacity, with the exception of where I think Canada and maybe Venezuela can be, but it's going to take them 2 years.
Yep. So listen, folks, thanks so much. Really appreciate you joining today. And listen, would love to connect with you. There's information down below. You can book a meeting with us. You can talk about it and see if Rogue Edge may be right for you. This is a tool that would save literally 30 hours a week of research, and you have it at your fingertips. Plus, you have access to Bill, Brian, and the entire team at
On our Discord channel.
On our Discord channel. So that's all we had for today. Really appreciate you joining, and that's all I got. So Bill, you want to walk us out?
That's right. Listen, folks, we appreciate you being here. Reach out, contact us. And Brian, I think we are ready to roll the logo.
All right. See you, folks. See you next week.